hand over to Damien Garros now.
Thanks. So yeah, hi everyone. So Damien Garros, I'm Managing Director at Network to Code. So my role at Network to Code is really work with our customer, help them, throughout their network automation journey, and those days it means working a lot on NetBox. Well, the presentation today is really going to have two parts. First, I'm going to introduce and John kind of pre-introduce a new plugin that we're sharing with the community. It's called NetBox Onboarding plugin, and I'll go through here to give a quick demo. And then the main part of the presentation is I really want to talk about what is it beyond the code of the plugin. How could you actually develop your project and package it and think of all those other aspects that will, in our perspective, really make the difference between a successful plugin and just a POC. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. So the audience, there's really two audiences. I'll say there's the first part, it's really for everybody, and the second part is definitely targeted at people that are intent to write some plugin without actually going into how we write the plugin itself, but more how we package it. It's not mandatory to actually understand all of the NetBox plugin architecture, but it's definitely a plus. I think John already gave a lot of information. I was hoping it will go a little bit more into the code, but that's fine. It's there's already a lot of example out there. So what is this NetBox onboarding plugin? And so the high level is really it's a plugin to help easily onboard new device into NetBox. That's actually request and needs that we saw from our customers, and we partnered with some of them to build similar solutions, more advanced than that. And since we're really community focused on network to code, we wanted to thought that was a good plugin to share with the community because as itself, I think it has a lot of value to help build your inventory, but also as technologist, every time personally I have to learn a new technology, a new framework, I really look forward to have good examples that I can look and analyze and investigate to understand how things work. So it's also our contribution to that, hoping to have this framework, this plugin, sorry, that is using, I will say, almost all of the features of the new plugin system and more, and so that people can learn from that. And the other aspect of it is what we're going to talk about today. We also wanted to use this project to share our thoughts on how you could actually organize your project itself and think in terms of continuous integrations and development environments and all of the best practices that we're trying to apply with our customer project. In terms of user story, why this plugin? The idea is really there's multiple persona here. From a user, the user always want to import their devices as easily as possible. They don't want to have to click through a lot of different UIs. And today, to create a device in NetBox, you need to have a lot of different elements. To get to the management IP, you actually need to have an interface and so on. So it's been reported by our user that sometimes the process is too hard. And on the other side, as an administrator, I want to empower my user to be able to have all of that. And I don't want to be the bottleneck. Like if they don't want to go through this process, I don't want to have to do everything myself. So I want to empower them to do everything. But at the same time, I want to make sure that the data that is in NetBox will be in line with the compliance, will have the right names, the naming convention, the serial numbers, and it's clean. And we don't end up, with a lot of different variations of those devices. And that's really where the onboarding plugins come in. So it really exposes, multiple ways for you to onboard new devices. There's a bulk way with the CSV view. You can add a single one. There's an APIs. And while you can actually define everything, you can define the platform and the role and be very specific on what you want to use. We also design it so that we will try to require as a minimum as little information as possible. And right now we're actually able to onboard a device just by the name of the site and the primary IP address. And based on that, we'll actually use Napalms and NetMiko to automatically discover the best as we can all the information. Now, the recommendation is really, to potentially import the device type from the community library and spend some time and make sure that we import it clean. But there's a lot of cases where it is so critical to have an inventory that having at least the devices where their proper platform and management IP NetBox is critical to be able to move forward. The plugin itself is using an asynchronous task, and it has things running in the background. So we're using RQ Worker, which is the infrastructure coming with NetBox, that NetBox already uses today for the webhook. So it's not technically part of the plugin, but it's part of the infrastructure we're getting. And we also have some UI structure that you show, and John showed some of that. Uh, as I mentioned, the goal is really building your inventory, bootstrapping your inventory, getting things started. So really focusing on creating the device, getting the platforms, getting the management IP. We're not looking at importing, all the cabling and all the interface and all the IP, because we, by experience, we know that it is a much complex problems. And here we're really focusing on the inventory when you don't have yours initially. And really it's from experience that automated importing is always better than manual importing from untrained people, and that the quality of the data in the source of truth is very important. Now, so I heard some feedback sometime, confusion, like NetBox is a source of truth. What is this system actually has to do with that? And I think it really comes to the idea that this new plugin system opens up new doors. Like there's when you write a plugin, there's a lot of existing component that NetBox already set up for you that you can reuse, and that will make your applications very fast to develop. Like you have access to the caching, we have access to the asynchronous task engine. Like we're doing the UI, we have access to all the user management and the authentications, which truly makes it super appealing to build application at what I call NetBox as a platform. And doesn't mean that it is actually part of the source of truth, but more it's a tool that now hosted on the NetBox servers and leveraging all of those infrastructure, and that is like surrounding the source of truth. Some other plugin will be more about extending the data model and adding more data into the source of truth, but this one is more about opportunistic to leverage all this infrastructure. High-level architecture. Really at the heart, we have this new table in the database that we're using to keeping track of all those asynchronous tasks. We have a set of APIs and UIs and forms to let you interact and define what new device you want to onboard. And then we're using, as I mentioned, the queuing, the Django RQ system that will let us have those asynchronous tasks. And then, all of the logic of really discovering the devices is actually running on the worker itself. And what's interesting also is those workers right now, we could have, we could scale that out pretty far if we wanted to increase the number of devices we can onboard at the same time. So just for reference, I also put in more of a sequence diagrams on how the element interact with each other. But I'll say, let's go straight to the demo. I hope the demo guy is with me today. Looks like he wasn't very good today. So what I have here is I have a completely stock NetBox. I don't have anything. I don't have any uh, participant, any plugin information. I don't have any sites. I don't. It's really NetBox itself. Now I'm gonna stop that. It's running on my laptop. I'm gonna stop it, and I'm actually I will do two changes. The first one is I need to install my plugin. So here I have a very simple Dockerfile that I'm using here, and I'm just adding this information saying I want to install my plugin. It's already published in PyPy. And then on the configuration side, what I'm saying here is that I want to enable my plugin. So that's really the two things you got to do. So now the next action will be for me to actually rebuild my environment. And what we should see here is that it is actually picking up and installing my plugin along with all the dependency, because it's packaged as the Python autonomous Python package, and then it has the information. In this case, I defined that I need all of napalms and Miko and all of that. So now I have my new container that has NetBox and my plugin. The next step is to actually run migrate, which will create my new table in the database, because this plugin comes with the table. It's not going to be mandatory for all plugin, but what's happening here is we're actually running the migrate, and we're seeing here that we have this new NetBox underscore onboarding table that has been created. And now I can start my instance again. And I'll explain how I'm actually starting all of that as part of the rest of the presentation. But if I go back now in my UI and I refresh, I see that now I have this new menu. My plugin has been installed. I have, access to the different view that are coming with the plugins and the different forms. So let's use the plugin. And really, the only thing I mentioned that is mandatory right now is to have a site. So I'm just going to create a new site. I call it New York. For sake of demo, I'm not going to create more, but again, in production environments, I will encourage to have, predefined your roles and understand what you want to do, or have some automated way to actually derive that. But here, I'll just go with the demo example. So we have this form that can let us, import in bulk, and we can define the platform, the role again, different sites. Here, I have a predefined list of devices, and I'm just going to import them here, and I'm just going to say submit. And so what's happening now is we populated the queue with, all of those devices, and we're already seeing that the first one is getting onboarded right now. And I'm going to refresh as it's happening. But this table will actually give me information of, what is the status of the onboarding. And the expectation is at some point I should see the platforms getting populated for this device. I should see, the device getting created. Of course, it is not working right now. Yeah. So my expectation is that it was going to work, but what we're seeing here, it actually failed, and but at least we have information about why is it failing, why is the device not reachable, and so on. So I won't go into more details, but the expected outcome in case of work is that you'll have your device created, you'll have the management interface that will have been created, the platform assigned, the device type, and all of that. So let's see if the second one come in. Otherwise, I'll just move on. So looks like my topology might be gone. Um, on that note, let's get back to the presentation. So hopefully now we have a good idea about what is this onboarding plugin and high level idea of that. Now I really want to talk about, and that's, I saw a lot of questions around how do I organize my project, how do I publish, how do I package, how do I everything, around just writing the code of the plugin, in the mailing list in Slack, just after the code was released. So that's why I thought it was interesting to have a, presentation on that. And so if I start a plugin, and specifically if I start a public plugin, the user stories here is that as a maintainer, I want to be able to easily test my code across multiple versions of Python and NetBox as well, because in the future we'll have, 2.9, 2.10, and a plugin written today, will be expected to work across a lot of different versions. So we need to be able to test that. At the same time, I want to make sure that external contributions are easy and the code that I get and that people propose, work as I expect and it's following all the guidelines so that it's easier for me to maintain. On the other side, as a potential contributors or as a user, I want to have a working development environment as quickly as possible. If I want to fix a bug, I don't want to spend hours, setting up everything. So that's, it is very easy. And so to do and to achieve that again, it involves a lot of tools. And I'm gonna, give you a high level idea and then we'll work through some of what we are recommending network to code. And by any mean, is that the only option that you can use actually for all of those tools? Usually there are multiple options, but in our experience at Network to Code, we found those tools and all those tools coming together to be, very, very effective. So we just wanted to share, our view of the situation. But the idea here is first you need something to manage your packages. A plugin by heart is a Python package. If you want it to be used across multiple systems, it has to be published in PyPy. So you need to have a solid strategy about building and publishing and managing your dependency and so on. Then NetBox itself requires, a database. It requires a Redis. It requires the worker. There's a lot of component and moving piece. So how can we have something that is portable that we can be able to use as a dev environment, but that we also can use in when we want to do some testing in continuous integration system, and I'll talk more about that. Then for various reasons that I explained, at some point you will need what I call the CLI tool. It's just that these portable environments is great. There's a lot of tools, but they end up creating very long CLI command. So we need something to make it easy to consume, easy to maintain, to hide a little bit of the complexity of those tools. Then if we move on to not more the packaging, but more the code itself, you need to think about linting. Linting is really about analyzing the quality of the code, the quality of the files. Are they following the guidelines in terms of how things should be organized and architectured and the documentations and all of that? It's not of a hygiene of the code itself. Then thinking about unit tests, making sure that all the functions and all the UIs and the APIs endpoint that you're exposing are working as expected. And last but not least, the continuing integration part, which is about making sure that all of those tests are running automatically every time somebody wants to make a change and will do the heavy lifting of identifying potential issue. So all of those tools need to be thought up, and that's what we're going to talk about in this presentation. So if you look at high level how the project could looks like, we have different directories. So the first one is really the main directory, where you have the code of your plugin, and that's where there's some examples that there already. Jeremy and the team already have this sound animal plugin that give a lot of examples on all the different bits that you can use. So that's where this code here. One thing that is part of the plugin that maybe I haven't seen before is you also have the test directory inside the plugin directory itself. It's not at the root of the project where you can find some time for some Python project. Here it is as part of it. Then moving on, we have the next directory, which is about everything you need to create your development environments, your portable environments. And here, what we're going to use is Docker Compose. And so you have, a configuration file for NetBox. You have Docker files and Docker Compose file. Then we're using Poetry to actually manage the packaging itself, and Poetry relies on two files, the poetry.lock and the pyproject.tomls, and so we'll talk more about it. And then last but not least, we have Invoke, which is a tool that help us, create very easy to use CLI command that will make all of that feels, super easy to use. And so in this case, Invoke is actually tied to a file called tasks.py. So let's look at those two one by one. So first, Poetry. Poetry is really a tool that is meant, to help you with your packaging. It does a lot of things. You manage your dependency. You can also manage your virtual environments, and it's really good at building and publishing to PyPy. It is definitely an alternative to setup.pys and requirement.txt. There's a lot of reasons why I recommend one versus the other, but we found that using Poetry really helps with the management of this package. And on the left side of the slide here, you have an example of how it actually looks like to have a PyProject files. And we see at the first section, you have information about the package itself, its version, its name, and the contact information. Then we have the information about the main dependency, meaning what a user will need to install in its own system. And then you have the ability to track another set of dependency, which will be used mostly for developers and contributors if they want to develop on their own, if they want to run all the linting and the test, then you have also to give them a list of packages. And so Poetry makes it easy to manage all of that. And it has all of those functions that you can use to, if you're running in dev environments, you can do Poetry install. If you're in as a user, the installations will be different, will be through pip. But as a developer, you will do Poetry install. And then once everything is done, you will be able to do Poetry build to actually build the packages, build the package, and then you will be able to publish. So Poetry, I personally was always, fighting with setup.py in my previous project, and here just make all of this process so much easier. Moving on, to build a portable environment, our recommendation is to look at something like Docker Compose. And the idea is really, you need at least 4 containers. You need the main Docker, you need Postgres, you need Worker, you need Redis, and to be able to have a working NetBox environment. And so packaging everything with Docker Compose makes it portable, make it easy to reuse across multiple systems. But the idea here is because you might be familiar with Docker Compose, for example, through NetBox Docker, which is a great project. A lot of people are running in production. Here, the difference is that this project is optimized for development. Like, for example, there's no nginx. There's a lot of things that are not here. And one thing that we're doing as well is we're actually mounting the local directory of my plugin into my NetBox container so that I can still develop as the code was local, but it's actually running into a Docker container. And I can have all the benefit of having a Docker and being portable without having the burden of rebuilding all the time. So it's really something optimized for development here. And that's what I was using earlier when I was actually showing you and I did the demo, starting Docker and so on. So used in the right way, Docker Compose can be a fantastic tool for that. Some examples like the Docker file that we're using in this case is actually fairly simple. One important part is the Docker file is using the arguments, meaning we will be able to use the same Docker files to build different containers for different versions of Python and different versions of NetBox. So that's what we have here. But beyond that, it's very just, pulling a specific version of NetBox out of GitHub and copying it on the file system and installing the requirements, and then copying my local project inside the container, and here doing an installation in this case into a development environment. Again, as a user, your Docker file will look different. It will look more like how I had mine at the beginning when I was doing the demo. A little bit more complex. The Docker Compose file can be a little bit intimidating, but just wanted to highlight here, again, it's just a place where we define our 4 different containers. What's important here is, again, this aspect of optimize for development here. We're running the development instance of Django, so we actually have more information. If something fails, we have a lot more information. We automatically run the migration so that you don't have to worry about that, and we're automatically mounting my local directory inside the container so that I don't have to rebuild every time a file change, and I can go fast through my system. Again, just wanted to highlight that there's actually, the goal is, since the project will be public, like you can go there and ask questions and look at it. Now, why do you need a CLI tool that I call a simple CLI? Because to be fair, a lot of the tools that we talked about and Docker Compose specifically it's very powerful, but tend to create really large and long command. And so to make all of that usable, we need a wrapper. We need something that will take and create aliases and hide long and repetitive CLI command to something simple. And the tool that I was using for years was Make and Makefile, but we actually started using Invoke now for that. And Invoke it's a pure Python implementation that lets you easily create like simple command, and for each of the command you have easily can have your own documentation. And so we can see here, for example, that Invoke build that I was raising earlier, will actually in the background turn into this fairly long command here that will define and instruct Docker Compose how things needs to be built. But the idea is that you build it once, somebody build it, and then users can just use that and don't have to worry about the complexity. Looking at the file itself, those specific CLI commands are defined in the tasks.py, and it's really pure Python. And if you look at it, it's really about just reading some environment variable and defining this context.run here. Everything else is just documentations and variables. So it's a very accessible tool that has a lot of capability. Definitely a big upgrade in my experience from a Makefile. The environment that we built comes with a dozen or so already pre-built command that we see very useful when you actually want yourself to manage your own project, or when you want people to be able to easily get started. So for example, you can build, you can start, you can destroy the volumes to start the database from scratch. You can start and stop the containers, but you can also do a lot of typical action that you will do throughout the development of the plugin, like generate some migrations or start a NetBox shell sessions if you want to do some quick experiment and so on. So everything can be packaged and then just become easy for potential contributors to use all of that. Moving on to testing and linting. So it's a very important aspect of to ensure the quality of your project. And the idea here is we're releasing 4 different steps. The first one is make sure the code is formatted properly, and for that our recommendation is to use Black. It's a very popular library that will actually help you both format your code, and that will also help you ensure that the code is formatted properly when you're running that as form as your CI pipeline. Then do some code analysis using tools like PyLint and Bendy that will just make sure that the code is properly written, that you don't have weird variable names, and that there's no really anti-Python, I will say, things, or however your project has defined that. And then the analysis of the document of the code itself using py.style, and last but not least, the unit test. So all of those different tools are very important, and so as part of the project, you'll find example of that and how we are actually using them, some example configuration files, and so on. If you look at the unit test specifically, because I think it's actually very interesting, and when you write an application as a NetBox plugin, it's slightly different than what you could have done as a standalone application. Here, the idea is that, and specifically in our case, for example, is because we are creating an APIs, we are leveraging the database. When you we want to write a test, we actually need to have access to all of that. So here, there's a frameworks provided by Django that let you for example, create your own test environments, and you have a fake API client, REST client that we can use to simulate how a user will actually connect, and was your own HTTP token. And you will be also able to populate a test database with, some object that you know and understand that you will be able to, go through as your test cases are running. So here, for example, we're creating a specific site, we're creating two different objects, onboarding task into the database. And with all of that, both the client and my database now, we're able to have this test where, I get the URL of my API endpoint, and I'm able to simulate a specific request to that. I'm able to ensure that the status of what the API is returning is correct, and that, the number of object that I'm getting is correct as well. So that's, a very simple unit test, but there's way more example in the project, and having the frameworks to do that is very important, again, to ensure the quality of your project. And again, wrapping everything around Invoke, and there's an Invoke unit test to be able to run this unit test, but also every single step of the pipeline. Like if you want to run just black, if you want to run just the PyLint, each one has its own function. And so to close, and to really bring everything, and at least all the testing together, now the idea is really to have this idea of continuous integration, like running the tests every time someone wants to make a change, either maintainers or an external contributors to the project. And so for that, in the public space, I will say the two main choices are usually Travis CIs or GitHub Actions. We're using Travis CI here. But the idea is really you'll have the ability, for example, to run the build and the tests within your test environment. So we're again reusing the same tools. We're using Invoke and all those shortcut commands that we created earlier. So it's the same function that I can run locally, but now I'm going to run them in Travis. And what we're telling Travis here is that I want to run my test, but I actually want to run them for multiple versions of Python. I want to run for Python 3.6, 3.7, 3.8. And I also want to run for multiple versions of NetBox. And here, since the plugin system is fairly new, we're actually testing on 2.8.3 and 2.8.4. But the idea is that as the project evolves, I'll be able to have way more version of NetBox and ensure that my code is actually working across many of them. And what Travis does in this case is actually create a matrix, and it will run 6 different series of tests for each combinations of Python and the version of NetBox. And for every time there is a change, all of that will run, and it will run all the unit tests and all the linting, and it will ensure that my code is compatible with NetBox and Python, and really increase the level of confidence on the whole project. That was a lot of information, but again, hopefully you can have started. Just to recap, so the tools that we're looking at here and our recommendation, by no means the only options that you have. Look at Poetry to manage your project and your dependency, Docker Compose to build working environments, Invoke to create easy to use CLI command properly documented, PyLint and Bendy for code analysis and the Django unit test frameworks itself for ensuring that the code is working, and then Travis CI. And for each of them, I try to put some different alternative just to highlight that is one option and by no means the only one. But I definitely, serious projects should include a lot of that, if not all of those different components. So here's the link. The plugin will be made public, I hope, by the end of the day. Everything is almost there. And then, yeah, thanks for your time. I think I'm right on time, and I'm happy to take maybe a couple of questions.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, that's right on time.
I wasn't, I wouldn't have bet on this one. So, man.
There've been a few questions throughout the Q&A and the Q&A dialogue down there. I think John and I have tried to answer some of them as they pertain to NetBox in a broader sense. If you want to take the time to go through and answer any questions that you'd like to pick out, we are at about time now. I've got a couple minutes just for some closing resources, but beyond that, if you want to take a few minutes, go for it.
There's a question maybe more for John. How does the plugin extend and modify existing NetBox view in terms of code? So there's actually some great example of that, but there's a class that you create and you can define places where you want to insert stuff. It's actually pretty neat.
Yeah, sorry, I posted the link to exactly what you're describing there in the docs for how you create those.
So when you create a new or modify an existing object using the NetBox provided model, it doesn't seem to create a changelog entry for that particular object, which is very useful for accounting, for example, when you use the device models to create a new. I guess this one is for you guys more than myself. ID, but...
Yeah, I had like a three-part answer there, but the WebEx chat doesn't provide a very good mechanism for this. I would suggest if you would like to continue that conversation, I think the Slack channel, the NetBox channel within our Slack community is a wonderful forum for that, or the mailing list is also an option for that.